So I guess to begin with, I would really like to know, because you have an academic background in politics, and you, like you said, you made a YouTube video to, or you made a YouTube channel to discuss modern society, everything about modern society. Um, like, how do you kind of reconcile the fact that you consider yourself to be apolitical, and what exactly does apolitical mean when these are kind of, some would say, fairly political actions and kind of backgrounds to have.
Very interesting question. Right. I think a lot of my background in political science, especially in political theory, which was what I really specialized in, mainly political theory and economic theory. I think a lot of that really informs how I see politics today relative to what politics was, say, just even in the late 20th century. I think now we've sort of entered this time in modern contexts in which ideology and sort of homogenous ideologies with real sort of, I would say, even otherworldly meaning for people has been replaced by multiple realities that now have to sort of coexist. So the experiences of people, I think, due to globalization, due to multiculturalism, and obviously the internet, especially the internet and technology, it's created sort of, I feel, groups of people, of sort of, I guess, tribes with their reality. And I think increasingly now, just as a consequence of the internet and just as trying to, as very flawed, just simple mortals trying to sort of navigate a world and culture that is sort of going at speeds far faster than we can sort of conceptualize and really keep pace with. We see our reality and our experiences as being the reality or the experience of everybody. And I think that's what I see online, at least a lot of, especially insofar as polarization is concerned. But I think because of that, I'm very appreciative, sorry, of the fact that how I see the world is very much just my worldview, my reality, and that it's coming into conflict with far more realities and interpretations of the world than ever before. And so I think I would say, quite now archaic ideas of political homogeneity, of political groups, of political parties, even, is quite redundant in terms of trying to approach and even alleviate the problems of people as a collective, as sort of a polis in modern societies. For that reason, I'm very apathetic toward politics, just politics as we see it, sort of political engagement. And I think that also now we've just become a lot more. I think the issues that politics was meant to address, very basic issues of hunger, of, I guess, meaning in society, have been met. So when we are political now, it's not for sort of those very menial, very practical things. It's for things like identity. And for me personally, I feel that sort of my identity is something that is not political. I don't see my identity as a political matter. I see it as a very individual and private thing that matters to me and the people who I know and love and interact with and have decided to build lives with. And that's possible. And so I don't feel a need to be political in that sense, which seems to be the only viable sense of being political in this day and age, in response to, I think, all this multiplicity of realities that are sort of clashing and bumping into each other constantly. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I guess um how exactly are you defining like being apolitical or something that's not political? Like, is it kind of this idea that it's like non-ideological, like it exists outside of is it existing out of a specific interpretation, like it's being objective,
Yeah,
or
I'd
is
see
it
it.
more sorry, like an aversion to the fact that there's so many different interpretations? You're okay with settling with your own interpretation and not trying to kind of subjugate other people
Yeah.
with your interpretation.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Definitely. And I think that I see ideology and sort of very. I think it has sort of a religious undertone to it, very much so in how people sort of really you're meant to in a sense subjugate yourself to an ideology like you would to a religion, say. And I think that now is in a lot of conflict with the individual and the centering of the individual in the modern context. And I think this is, for instance, where I would say, like the left, for instance, gets into a lot of issues, especially sort of moral dilemmas and contradictions, especially in trying to communicate with outsiders. But I think that because that's sort of been lost, that sort of, I would say, religious allegiance to an ideology, to something that is that you would die for, in a sense. You die for your political beliefs. I wouldn't say I'm political. And to be fair, I wouldn't call most people in sort of modern societies, advanced economies, political in the sense that I think they mean this idea of sort of political engagement, of actually really doing things. Yeah. I mean, I don't consider
So,
my, sorry.
oh no, 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 sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
Oh, sorry. That's fine. You can go.
Oh, it's. I'm gonna take like maybe the extreme kind of response to this, where I mean this is like in like feminist writing or like Gramsci, like he believed every action is like a political action, or yeah, the feminist writing of like the personal is political. The idea that in fact every action the individual takes is a political action in some sense, and what you're kind of criticizing here actually kind of follows along with that, like the idea of like kind of bourgeois intellectuals kind of philosophizing about things to the point where what they're philosophizing about has no sort of practical kind of like relevance to like the average person or just like an average daily life, but they think that they're being like non-ideological because they're philosophizing. But the fact that they have like the leisure and the material conditions to spend all of their day like philosophizing about things, thinking about things, that in itself is ideological because it's based off of kind of like a certain economic system that needs to be ideologically justified. And it's like that idea of kind of, I don't know, like old Marxist ideas of like the base and the superstructure, where it's not just like the or the political process that sustains the economic process, the base. It's also like the arts. It's, you know, stuff like YouTube. It's like the sciences. It's all of these other institutions. It's social, the social life, like cultural life. They help to sustain and justify the base that seems to be non-ideological, but that's because the superstructure has to kind of work. Like if the superstructure doesn't work, then things start to feel ideological. They feel like they're not natural. I don't know if that really makes sense. It's I'm just trying to kind of, I'm trying to see like I would argue like everything is very political. It's just like I think like Zizek would argue, once we start to say something is ideological or non-political, that's actually when it's at its most effective at being an ideology, because it's got you to believe that it's like an objective sort of like truth. Like even like the idea of valuing the individual is from a specific ideology of individualism and like liberalism. And I think, you know, that's a great ideology, but it's still like an ideology. I wonder if you agree or.
Yes, I disagree.
Okay.
I definitely disagree with the idea that the personal is political. And I think what you said makes sense to me. I think that's where I have issue is with how what you're saying. I was getting sort of a sense of critical theory, also a bit of Foucault, this idea about power. When you think that it sort of disappeared, that's when it's at its most prominent or concentrated. I think the issue that I have with your position and the theories that you're putting forward, like critical theory, feminism, etc., is that these theories and ideologies are more so, or ideas, I wouldn't call them ideologies exactly, I think more so ideas. They're meant to be, they were meant to be tools, sort of, like the means to understanding the condition of people, of certain groups of people, of a society. That's very different to them being perceived as truth or as overarching truth claims that apply to everybody and that should be applied as sort of ends in themselves. I feel that a lot of people see feminism in a very political sense. This idea that feminism is this idea, this truth that men and women are equal and that women should be treated with equality and as if they are human beings, autonomous human beings, akin to men, whatever. I think the problem there is that it projects this truth about men and women's situation, which then doesn't make any space for the reality, which is that there's some men in this world who feel that women actually have it a lot better than they do, that they are at a disadvantage, that women are the privileged group of people who are picky, and that they're responsible for the rise of incels and why men are lonely and killing themselves. There's no space within that politics of feminism for even being able to conceptualize this possibility or even to conceptualize sort of incels as being disadvantaged, a disadvantaged group. Whereas if you consider it as feminism as sort of like tools, sort of like a philosophical feminism, this idea of trying to understand a woman, yourself, how you having the tools to realize yourself, your autonomy, to realize that you're an individual with freedom, with rights, who is deserving of X, Y, and Z, who also has, importantly, responsibilities to having those rights. That you're not entitled to things, that, with everything comes responsibility, comes consequences. If I decide that I'm going to be an autonomous woman in this world and that I'm going to prioritize my educational endeavors and becoming a girl boss, that may mean the consequences that I'm not going to attract as many eligible men, or that I'm not going to have children, and I need to come to terms with that and accept that I can't have the best of both worlds. And also that I'm going to interact with men who are at a disadvantage or who may feel like they're at a disadvantage. It makes room for a lot more than what politics does. Politics tells you how you're going to sort of make the world a better place, or it tells you what the world is like, how things are like. And that comes into immediate contradiction with the modern world and its multiple realities in which everybody is now bickering because everybody thinks that they know what the world is all about, that they've got the answers and the truths, when none of us do, let's be honest, I would say. But I think that's the problem with politicizing, especially things that I think are far more in line with and would be realized in far more meaningful a way for individuals if they were left out of politics, if they were not sort of, I think, influenced by politics. I think this idea that the personal is political has led to far more harm, and that we can see now in the long term, than it has positives, especially, I would say, well, I wouldn't say especially for women, but I think for women and for men, I think it has introduced politics into spheres of life that really cannot be explained or rationalized through political concepts universally or consensually between communities and people, especially not between individuals and their intimate relationships. I think it's caused a lot more harm than it has good. And I think we're already starting to see the implications or ramifications of that. So yeah, yeah.
So just to back up, it was would it be correct to say that like your idea of when something becomes political is like when it becomes normative, that there's like tools to theorize about things, but it's when those tools become used to justify certain actions. And like so like feminism, for example, you talked about philosophical feminism. And I'm going to like feminism is like very from like Wollstonecraft to like Hooks to like it's a very I mean there's like Dworkin, which would be like a very radical feminist, more potentially misandrist feminist, and then there's like Hooks, who discussed the things that you talked about. You know, she reached a hand to men and also taught them like certain things that were affecting women were also affecting men, and you know that's probably why she's a pretty effective feminist thinker. But it is like a definitely not like a monolithic school of thought.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, the like there's the philosophical feminism, which provides a critical lens or a critical tool to use, which is it would be apolitical, but it's if you use those tools for like change, for example, then it becomes political. Is that the
Yes, yeah, I'm sort of saying that. I think I'm also saying that I think now feminism, which is very politicized, is seen as sort of a all-encompassing sort of global truth that women are treated unfairly to men, that there's a gender pay gap, that men are privileged, are at an advantage, say, just very generically. I know there's different sort of subsets of feminism, but just generically. And that inevitably does not fit into the reality of many men and many groups of men in modern societies who go against that claim wholeheartedly. I mean, in the UK, actually, I can't even remember the survey, but at least a few years ago, I mean, the idea of men calling themselves feminists was just a no-no. So I think that's the problem when something becomes so political that it really just alienates anybody who doesn't conform, just doesn't sort of fall into line with what is being said. It sort of makes truth claims. And I think whenever you make those sorts of truth claims, you inevitably undermine the potential for actual individual critique, for philosophy, which I think is very important and is really lost on modern politics, especially in appreciating the individual and sort of individual growth and development, understanding outside of the influence of sort of these ideological inputs and truth claims that seem to be more important than the actual multifaceted nature of the individual. Yeah.
okay? So it's almost sounding a bit like and I do agree with you that it's definitely multifaceted, and I do think one of the weak points of feminism is, you know, I guess I would, it's usually termed like radical feminism, and it can be extended to like turf ideologies and stuff like that, where it's usually when a perspective begins to kind of close people out from engaging with it, or kind of reflexively just censors people like without uh, like I think it's not like an extremely radical view to hold that um, like men can be pretty miserable specifically because of reasons pertaining to their manhood, and then just women in general can be more miserable. That both groups are miserable, it's just one might be more. And I think that then you immediately have people jump and they'll go like, no, like men are actually way more miserable than women, or
Yeah.
women are way more
Yeah.
miserable than men.
Yeah,
It could
exactly.
be it could be both, and then there could be one that's a bit more bad, historically speaking, in my opinion. But the I think it's like it's online spaces are very much generating that kind of reflexive, just like immediately one group is bad, one group is good, and it's I don't know with I'm not totally for the idea of becoming like apolitical because it's like too confusing and like I don't want to engage. But at the same time, I don't want to engage in this like extreme polarizing culture. And
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
because the idea of like centrism and stuff has become very like ridiculed online, which is
Yeah.
fair because as groups become more polarized, it's like for you to actually meet them in the middle is like you have to start carrying two really extreme values at the same time and justifying both of them. And say one side is actually way more extreme than the other. It's like is it really the middle, or are you actually very much compromising the middle to one side because of how extreme they are? It's like centrism itself starts to become a little bit confusing.